Thank you, Rick. Randy?
Um, So, can you hear me?
Can you hear me now? So I just wrote down a lot of notes, and I'm not quite sure I should use mine or use these. So, I think there's 4 or 5 things that we should be focused on. First, I think that both Rick and Catherine are right, and Luis is right too, that there's not, there, in this town, in the last few days, we are now hearing about a mandate for something that was never really talked about. And so it's a little, I appreciate the candor of saying that who knew where the $20 million or $20 billion proposal came from. Trump, frankly, was about to make that proposal at a charter school that we represent, and probably found out that we represented that charter school. It was a charter school that worked in Cleveland, but it was a union-represented charter school, and decided to do it at a charter school that was then a failing charter school. So the optics of that don't make sense. The optics of floating names of people who have been, for the Common Core on steroids for Education Secretary, given that he said, I want to get rid of the Common Core, that doesn't make sense. The whole notion about what's going to happen in terms of the trial on Trump University on the heels of ITET and Corinthian, and then saying that you want to drain the swamp, but then also letting the floodgates happen in terms of for-profit colleges, that doesn't make sense. So there's a whole lot of stuff that is going to have to wade its way through before somebody says, this is what the Trump policy is going to be. But doesn't mean that there's not going to be a whole lot of talking heads that are talking about it, and including us here today. So that's number one. Number two, I do think that we've taken a major step backwards, and frankly, I think that John King is as responsible for it as this election on the and the rhetoric around this election on the issue of consensus around public education. In December of 2015, and President Obama said it, there was like a Christmas miracle that happened. That contrary to virtually everything else that was going on in Washington, that one of the most contentious issues in the country, because parents have been involved and were very upset with the test fixation, got resolved in Washington in terms of a fundamental change of education policy. And Republicans and Democrats alike all stood up and said, this is a good bill. The Republicans didn't say, the parts we got were a good bill, but the parts we didn't get were bad. They got up and said that, yes, the Title I funding should go to kids this way, and yes, we fought for portability, which is very similar to Trump's proposal about the $20 billion, but they said, no, this is a good bill. And this goes back to the states, and the local control is really important, and we need to give teachers and parents a right to actually do the work they need to do to help kids. And it was a push for big change, but also real stability at the local level to do this. The reason I say a step backwards is we're going to go right back into disruption, ideology versus evidence, and we're going to go right back into that conversation that we thought that, at least in our little shtetl of education, or K-12 education, we had basically stopped. Or we had basically said, let's roll up our sleeves and actually do the work and see what works and things like that. I do think what's going to happen is it's going to be very disruptive, and there's going to be a lot of churn about, and a lot of ideology versus evidence, and as Luis and others have said already. And I think that is a big step backwards, and it will take real leadership to actually get us back to where we were in December of 15. And frankly, I thought what Senator Alexander did with the other 5 Republican senators and the 6 Democratic senators saying, let's hew to the law, let's do that, was really important. And that would be a sign of real leadership if we could get back to that. That's number 2. Number 3, I think we don't know what's going to happen on issues of, early childhood, on issues of higher education, on all of those issues, and we're going to have to see. I agree with Rick that these are, at the back of the, they're the back of the line issues. But that gets me to the last point I wanted to make, which is this. There is an education issue, and that is very kind of omnipresent on our mind. And it's not simply the issue about whether, I would call it equity in schools. 35 states spend less money than they did on public education in 2008. The whole issue about one of the things we have seen in terms of these so-called choice programs or voucher and privatization programs, it does actually drain money from kids. The will of the people seemed to suggest the other way around. Even as they were voting for Republican administrations, they rejected all of these privatization attempts in ballot initiatives from states as diverse as Georgia and Massachusetts, and they also approved the ballot initiative in California, although they didn't approve the ballot initiative in Oregon. So there's a lot of evidence that says people want local control of schools, and they also, if they feel like the money is well spent, they want to spend money on schools. All of that, put to one side. The last point I want to make is this issue in schools right now, colleges and K-12, people and kids are really fearful. And the language that has been used on the right and the left has been obnoxious. I'm sure I'm going to be trolled for this forever. It's horrible. On the left, when people have been kind of a sense of a conservative professor wanting to speak in a college and people shutting it down, I agree with Rick. That's horrible. We need to have real civitas. I may totally, completely disagree with everything Rick says, but we need to have a real engagement. That is American democracy. That's pluralism. But the same right now is true on the right. And the stuff that's going on in colleges and K-12 is really horrible. And people of good mind and goodwill have to stand up and stop the hate and stop this. And that work needs to happen, and that is the work of schooling, and that is the work of civitas. And frankly, that is going to be the first test of leadership throughout the country. And I would plead for conservatives and progressives alike to say, this must stop. We must denounce hate. We must be able to live in a pluralistic society where we respect each and every one of us.